Welcome, dear listeners, to a place where the shadows lengthen and the whispers of the unknown crawl into your ear. I am your guide through the darkness, and tonight, I have a tale for you. A tale of a town draped in the vibrant colors of autumn, eagerly awaiting the most cherished night of the year. But beneath the festive veneer, a chilling secret lies dormant, a history written in blood, waiting for the perfect moment to recommence its gruesome cycle. This is a story of friendship, of courage, and of the terrifying realization that the most monstrous masks are not those worn on Halloween, but those that conceal the darkness within. So, find a comfortable spot, dim the lights, and prepare yourselves for Shadows Behind the Mask, a Halloween slaughter. But before we descend into the heart of Oakhaven's dread, if you are a fan of tales that will keep you up at night, that will make you question every creak in your floorboards and every shadow in the corner of your eye, then I implore you to reach for that subscribe button. By subscribing, you become a part of this community of thrill seekers, and you ensure that you won't miss a single terrifying tale we unearth from the crypt. So go on, click that button and the notification bell. You wouldn't want to be left alone in the dark, would you? Now, let the story begin. The town of Oakhaven, nestled deep within a valley carved by ancient glaciers, was a place that seemed to exist in a perpetual state of autumn. Even in the height of summer, the leaves of the colossal oak trees that gave the town its name held a hint of the fiery reds and oranges to come. But it was in October that Oakhaven truly came alive. The air grew crisp, carrying the sweet, earthy scent of decaying leaves and the distant promise of wood smoke. Pumpkins, like cheerful orange sentinels, appeared on every porch, their carved grins a mixture of mirth and menace. Halloween wasn't just a holiday in Oakhaven. It was a season, a way of life, the town's most defining characteristic. For Liam, however, the approaching festivities felt less like a celebration and more like a carefully constructed facade. A senior at Oakhaven High, he had lived in the town his entire life, and with each passing year, the forced joviality of the Halloween season seemed to grate on him more. He saw the cracks in the town's picturesque perfection, the peeling paint on the historic storefronts, the hushed, almost fearful conversations of the older residents when they thought no one was listening, the way the shadows in the sprawling Blackwood forest that bordered the town seemed to deepen and writhe as October 31st drew near. This year, the unease was a palpable thing, a low hum beneath the surface of the town's cheerful preparations for the annual Halloween festival. It was a feeling shared by his closest friends, though they all dealt with it in their own ways. There was Maya, a fountain of nervous energy and a walking encyclopedia of local folklore and superstitions. She was the one who had first told them the story of the Carver of Oakhaven, a tale most dismissed as a campfire story to frighten children. The legend spoke of a masked figure who, every few decades, would descend upon the town on Halloween night, a silent, relentless force of nature that would leave a trail of carnage in its wake before vanishing as mysteriously as it had appeared. Maya, with her collection of good luck charms and her insistence on never stepping on cracks in the pavement, believed every word of it. Then there was Chloe, the pragmatist. Having moved to Oakhaven only 2 years prior, she viewed the town's obsession with Halloween with a detached amusement. She was the anchor of their group, the one who would roll her eyes at Maya's superstitions and counter Liam's cynicism with a dose of unflappable logic. She didn't believe in curses or masked boogeymen. She believed in what she could see and prove. And yet, even Chloe had admitted that there was a certain weight to the air in Oakhaven as October wore on, a feeling of being watched that she couldn't quite shake. Rounding out their quartet was Noah, the artist and the outcast. He found beauty in the macabre, his sketchbook filled with charcoal drawings of skeletal trees, crumbling gravestones, and unsettlingly realistic portraits of the town's more eccentric residents. Noah was quiet and observant, his silence often mistaken for aloofness. He didn't talk much about the town's legends, but he listened with an intensity that suggested a deeper understanding, a connection to the town's shadowed history that the others couldn't quite grasp. Their pre-Halloween ritual was always the same. A late-night study session at the Oakhaven Public Library, a historic building of dark wood and towering shelves that always smelled of aging paper and lemon polish. It was during one of these sessions, a week before Halloween, that the first thread of their reality began to unravel. They were supposed to be working on a history project, but the conversation had inevitably drifted to the upcoming festival and Maya's growing anxiety. "You guys, I'm telling you, this year feels different," she said, her voice a hushed whisper that barely disturbed the library's solemn silence. She nervously twisted a silver ring on her finger, a family heirloom that was said to ward off evil spirits. "Old Man Hemlock told me that the squirrels are gathering nuts with a frenzy he hasn't seen since 1988. Chloe snorted, not looking up from her textbook. "Maya, it's called autumn. That's what squirrels do. And Old Man Hemlock also thinks the mailman is a government spy. But 1988 was the year of the last incident." Maya pressed on, her eyes wide. The incident was the town's euphemism for the unsolved disappearances of 3 teenagers on Halloween night that year. The official story was that they had run away, but the older residents knew better. They remembered the fear, the hushed whispers of a figure in a simple white mask seen near the edge of the woods. Liam, who had been staring out the large arched window at the wind-whipped leaves skittering across the deserted street, turned back to the table. "She's not entirely wrong, Chloe. There's a weird vibe this year. Even my dad is on edge, and he thinks the scariest thing about Halloween is the price of candy." Noah, who had been silently sketching in his notebook, slid it across the table. The drawing was of the town square, but it was distorted, the familiar clock tower twisted into a menacing spire, and the cheerful pumpkin decorations sporting leering, demonic faces. In the center of the square stood a tall, shadowy figure, its face a blank, white oval. Before Chloe could offer a logical dismissal of the drawing, a loud thud from the floor above made them all jump. The library was officially closed, and besides their small group and the elderly librarian, Mrs. Gable, who was dozing at the front desk, they were supposed to be alone. "Probably just the pipes," Chloe said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Or a ghost," Maya whispered, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. Liam, driven by a mixture of curiosity and a desire to prove there was a rational explanation, stood up. "I'm going to check it out. It's probably just a book falling off a shelf." The others reluctantly followed him up the creaking spiral staircase to the second floor, which housed the town's archives, a dusty, seldom visited collection of Oakhaven's history. The air was colder here, and the silence more profound. They moved slowly down a narrow aisle, the towering shelves creating a claustrophobic effect. It was at the very end of the aisle, in a dark corner, that they found the source of the noise. A large, leather-bound book lay on the floor, its spine split open. It looked ancient, the leather cracked and worn. It was a journal, its pages filled with elegant, but slightly frantic cursive. "We shouldn't read this," Maya said, her voice trembling. "It's someone's private thoughts." But Liam was already kneeling, his fingers tracing the faded gold lettering on the cover. A.W. Blackwood. Blackwood. Chloe's interest was piqued. As in, the family that founded Oakhaven? The journal belonged to Alistair Blackwood, one of the town's original settlers. As they huddled together, using the light from Liam's phone to read the brittle, yellowed pages, a story far more terrifying than Maya's campfire legends began to emerge. Alistair wrote of a pact, a deal made with an ancient entity to ensure the prosperity of the new settlement. The entity, which he referred to only as the Shadow, demanded a tribute, a tithe of life, every 30 years on the night of Samhain. The tribute was to be collected by a mortal vessel, a carver, who would don a mask carved from the wood of a petrified oak tree at the heart of the Blackwood forest. The mask was not merely a disguise. It was a key, a conduit that allowed the Shadow to cross into their world. The journal was filled with Alistair's growing horror and regret. He described the first carving in gruesome detail, the terror of his fellow settlers, and the chilling silence that followed. He had tried to break the pact, to destroy the mask, but it was too powerful. The journal ended with a desperate, rambling entry, dated October 30th, 1848, 30 years after the town's founding. Alistair wrote of his plan to hide the mask, to create a new tradition, a festival, to appease the shadow with offerings of a different kind, a celebration of life and harvest to ward off the darkness. He feared it wouldn't be enough. His last words were a cryptic warning. The mask yearns for a face. The shadow craves the slaughter. Do not let the artisan find his masterpiece. A heavy silence fell over the group as Liam finished reading the final entry aloud. Chloe was pale, her usual skepticism replaced by a look of dawning horror. Maya was openly weeping, her quiet sobs echoing in the dusty archives. Noah stared at the journal with a strange, unreadable expression, his fingers clenching and unclenching at his sides. This can't be real, Chloe stammered, shaking her head. It's just a story. A very old, very creepy story. Is it, Chloe? Liam's voice was grim. Think about it. The disappearances, the incidents, every 30 years. 1988, 1958, 1928. It all lines up. The Halloween festival. Alistair Blackwood created it to try and stop this. The artisan. His masterpiece. Maya whispered, her eyes wide with terror. The main event of the festival this year. They're unveiling a recently discovered artistic masterpiece from the town's founding. A ceremonial mask. The realization hit them all with the force of a physical blow. The town, in its ignorance, was not just celebrating its history. It was about to reawaken its curse. They were planning to unveil the very mask that Alistair Blackwood had hidden, the conduit for the carver. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of footsteps on the main floor. Peeking through the railing, they saw Mrs. Gable, now wide awake, her face a mask of concern. Is everything all right up there? I thought I heard a noise. They quickly scrambled to put the journal back, though it was impossible to hide its broken spine. When they came downstairs, Mrs. Gable's eyes immediately fell on the dusty smudges on their clothes and the guilty expressions on their faces. You've been in the archives, haven't you? She said, her voice sharper than they had ever heard it. Her gaze lingered on the staircase, a flicker of something that looked like fear in her eyes. Some things are better left undisturbed. History has a way of repeating itself, especially in a town like Oakhaven. As they left the library and stepped out into the cold night air, the town no longer looked the same. The cheerful pumpkins on the porches now seemed to be mocking them, their carved grins sinister and knowing. The rustling of the leaves sounded less like a gentle autumn song and more like dry, rattling bones. The shadows that pooled in the alleyways and under the ancient oak trees were no longer just an absence of light. They were alive, watchful, and waiting. They now carried a terrible knowledge, a burden that separated them from the rest of the blissfully ignorant town. The carver of Oakhaven was not a legend. It was a promise. And the festival, the celebration that was the lifeblood of their town, was going to be its stage. The mask had been found, and somewhere in the shadows, an artisan was waiting to claim his masterpiece and unleash a Halloween slaughter. The four of them stood in the deserted town square, the twisted clock tower looming over them, and for the first time, they understood the true meaning of fear. It was not the fear of a ghost story told in the dark, but the cold, certain knowledge that the monster was real, and it was coming for them. The week leading up to Halloween was a descent into a shared paranoia. The knowledge they had unearthed in the library sat like a stone in their stomachs, a secret that isolated them from the rest of Oakhaven. To everyone else, the escalating festivities were a source of joy and excitement. To Liam, Maya, Chloe, and Noah, every carved pumpkin, every hanging scarecrow, every cheerful happy Halloween was a nail being hammered into the town's coffin. They tried to act normal, to go through the motions of school and homework, but the journal's words were a constant, looping soundtrack in their minds. The mask yearns for a face. The shadow craves the slaughter. They met in secret, in the quiet corners of the school cafeteria, in the secluded parts of the park, their conversations low and urgent. Their first instinct was to go to the police. Liam and Chloe, the most pragmatic of the group, argued that they had to try, that they couldn't just sit on this information. They made an appointment with Sheriff Brody, a man whose most pressing concerns usually involved teenagers toilet papering the town square or mediating disputes over prize-winning pumpkins at the county fair. They found him at his desk, a large man with a kind face and a perpetually weary expression, poring over the schedule for the Halloween festival. They laid it all out for him, the legend of the carver, the dates that lined up with the town's tragedies, and the discovery of Alistair Blackwood's journal. They watched as his initial paternal amusement slowly curdled into a mixture of disbelief and pity. "Kids," he said, leaning back in his creaking chair and sighing heavily. "I appreciate you coming to me. I do. But you have to understand how this sounds. A town curse? A haunted mask? This is Oakhaven. We're known for our spooky stories. It's part of our charm, our brand, if you will. But the journal," Chloe insisted, her voice tight with frustration. "It's real. It's from Alistair Blackwood himself." "And I'm sure it is," Sheriff Brody said, his tone placating. "But it's also the ramblings of a man from 200 years ago. People were superstitious back then. He was probably just trying to make sense of a harsh winter or a bout of sickness. As for the incidents, they're tragedies, yes, but they're not connected. The disappearances in '88 were ruled a runaway case. The fire in '58 was faulty wiring. These things happen." He offered them a tired smile. "You've all got great imaginations. Maybe you should team up and build a haunted house for the festival next year. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to figure out the security logistics for a crowd of 5,000 people and one very valuable, very old mask." They left the station feeling dejected and foolish. The very man who was supposed to protect the town had dismissed their warning as a childish fantasy. They were on their own. The weight of this responsibility began to take its toll on the group, fraying the edges of their friendship. Maya grew more withdrawn, her fear manifesting as a quiet, constant trembling. She surrounded herself with protective talismans, her pockets filled with salt and iron filings, and she refused to go out after dark. Noah, on the other hand, became more intense, his artistic focus shifting entirely to the carver. His sketchbook filled with increasingly disturbing images of the masked figure, its form becoming more defined, more menacing with each new drawing. He would spend hours at the edge of the Blackwood forest, just staring into the dense, dark woods as if waiting for something to emerge. Liam and Chloe found themselves locked in a frustrating cycle of debate. Liam, consumed by a grim determination, wanted to take matters into their own hands. "We have to get to that mask," he argued during a tense meeting in his garage, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and fallen leaves. "If we can destroy it, we can break the cycle, just like Alistair Blackwood tried to do." "And how are we supposed to do that, Liam?" Chloe countered, pacing back and forth. "It's the centerpiece of the festival. It's going to be in a glass case surrounded by security. We're not a team of professional art thieves. We're 4 teenagers who will get arrested for trespassing and probably end up in juvenile detention on Halloween night, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is when the town will actually need us." Her logic was infuriatingly sound, and it left them at a dead end. Their only remaining option was to find out more, to uncover a weakness, a loophole in the curse that Alistair Blackwood might have missed. Their research led them back to the library archives, but Mrs. Gable seemed to be watching them now. Whenever they went near the second floor, she would appear, offering to help them find a book or reminding them that the archives were for serious historical research only. They were forced to dig through the town's digital records, a far less comprehensive but safer alternative. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that they found a small, almost insignificant detail. In a digitized newspaper article from 1958 about the fire at the old textile mill on Halloween night, a single witness statement mentioned a strange symbol, a spiral with 3 lines radiating from the center, painted on the mill's wall shortly before the fire. The witness had dismissed it as a teenage prank. Noah, who had been listlessly scrolling through the microfiche reader, suddenly sat bolt upright. He fumbled for his sketchbook and flipped through the pages. He stopped on a drawing he had done of a weathered, almost forgotten gravestone at the edge of the old cemetery. Carved into the stone, barely visible beneath the moss and lichen, was the same symbol. The name on the gravestone was Ezekiel Thorne, a name that also appeared in Alistair Blackwood's journal. He was listed as the town's first artisan. The artisan, his masterpiece, Maya whispered, her face ashen as she looked at the symbol on the screen and then at Noah's drawing. The journal said not to let the artisan find his masterpiece. It's not the carver. The artisan is a person. A chilling new dimension to their problem settled over them. They weren't just dealing with a supernatural entity. There was a human element, a line of people who, throughout the town's history, had been complicit in the slaughter, the ones who prepared the way for the carver. And if that line had continued, it meant there was an artisan in Oakhaven right now. This revelation turned their fear inward, twisting it into suspicion. They began to look at everyone differently. Was it Mr. Abernathy, the quiet, unsettlingly intense high school history teacher who had been so instrumental in getting the lost mask displayed at the festival? Or was it one of the town's founding families, who publicly championed Oakhaven's history while perhaps secretly honoring the dark pact that had ensured their ancestors' prosperity? The escalating tension was no longer just in their minds. Strange things began to happen. Small incidents that could be dismissed as coincidences but, when woven together, formed a tapestry of dread. A dead raven was left on Maya's doorstep, its claws clutching a withered oak leaf. Liam found the tires of his car slashed, and in the dust on his windshield, someone had drawn the spiral symbol. Chloe, while jogging near the edge of the Blackwood forest, saw a figure in the trees, its face obscured by the shadows, but she could have sworn it was wearing a simple white mask. She didn't stop running until she was back in the brightly lit center of town, her heart hammering against her ribs. Noah experienced the most direct and terrifying encounter. He had gone to the old cemetery to get a better look at the artisan symbol on Ezekiel Thorne's gravestone. As dusk settled, casting long, distorted shadows across the tombstones, he felt a sudden, unnatural cold. The ambient sounds of the evening, the chirping of crickets, the distant hum of traffic faded into a deafening silence. He looked up and saw a figure standing at the far end of the cemetery, partially hidden behind a large mausoleum. It was tall and unnaturally still. As Noah watched, his breath catching in his throat, the figure slowly lifted its head, and even from that distance, Noah could see the stark, emotionless white of the mask. It was not the ornate, carved mask from the legend, but a simple, blank face, a placeholder, a promise of what was to come. Noah didn't scream. He didn't run. He simply stood there, frozen, a strange sense of recognition washing over him. It was the figure from his nightmares, the figure he had drawn countless times. As quickly as it had appeared, it retreated back into the shadows of the mausoleum and was gone. He stumbled back into town, his face pale and his hands shaking. When he told the others what he had seen, the last vestiges of their doubt evaporated. The carver, or at least a herald of its arrival, was no longer just a threat from the pages of a journal. It was here. It was walking the streets of their town. And it had seen them. The night before Halloween, they gathered for the last time in Liam's garage, the atmosphere thick with a sense of impending doom. They had no plan, no weapons, and no allies. All they had was the terrifying knowledge of what was coming and the horrifying realization that the town's most beloved tradition was, in fact, a sacrificial ritual. "We can't stop it," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's too late." "No," Liam said, his voice hard. "It's not. We can't save everyone. We know that now, but we can save ourselves. And we can try to save as many people as we can." "How?" Chloe asked, her voice weary. "By screaming the monster is real, in the middle of the town square? They'll think we're part of the show." It was Noah who finally offered them a sliver of hope. He had been quiet throughout the meeting, his eyes distant. He unrolled a large piece of paper on the workbench. It was a detailed map of the town square and the surrounding streets. "The carver is relentless," he said, his voice low and steady. "But it's a creature of ritual. It follows a path." The journal mentioned the sites of the first carvings. The old well, the hanging tree, the first church. All of those places are still here, just disguised. The old well is now the fountain in the center of the square. The hanging tree is the giant oak decorated with lanterns. The first church is now the Historical Society building, where the mask will be unveiled. He pointed to a series of alleyways and back entrances. We can't stop it from starting. But if we know its path, we can get people out of the way. We can create diversions. We can buy them time. It wasn't a plan for victory, but it was a plan for survival. As they huddled around the map, a sense of grim purpose settled over them. They were no longer just scared kids. They were the town's only watchmen, the unwilling guardians against a darkness they had never asked to face. As they finalized their strategy, a powerful gust of wind rattled the garage door, and the first drops of a cold, hard rain began to fall. It felt like the sky itself was weeping for what the morning would bring. Halloween had arrived, and with it, the echo of a scream that had been waiting 30 years to be heard again. Halloween dawned not with a cheerful, crisp autumn light, but under a bruised, purple sky. The rain from the previous night had settled into a persistent, miserable drizzle, clinging to the air and making the colorful decorations look sad and waterlogged. A thick, unnatural fog rolled in from the Blackwood forest, blanketing the town in a disorienting white shroud. It was the kind of weather that should have sent people scurrying indoors, but in Oakhaven it only added to the atmosphere. The townsfolk, wrapped in raincoats and huddled under umbrellas, were undeterred. The festival was the culmination of the entire season, and a little fog wasn't going to stop the celebration. For Liam, Maya, Chloe, and Noah, the fog was a living entity, a suffocating presence that seemed to muffle sound and conceal untold horrors. They moved through the growing crowds in the town square like ghosts, their faces pale and grim. They had their designated positions, their desperate, flimsy plan. Maya, armed with a powerful air horn, was stationed near the main stage, ready to create a diversion the moment the mask was unveiled. Liam and Chloe were on opposite sides of the square, their task to guide people towards the designated safe routes, the alleyways and side streets that Noah had identified as being off the Carver's ritualistic path. Noah himself was in the clock tower, a position that gave him a bird's-eye view of the square, his phone ready to coordinate their movements. The festival began, a discordant symphony of cheerful carnival music, the laughter of children, and the low, anxious thrumming in the four friends' chests. The air was thick with the smell of wet leaves, popcorn, and something else, something metallic and cold that seemed to catch in the back of their throats. From his perch, Noah watched the crowd swell, a sea of humanity, all of them blissfully unaware that they were standing on a sacrificial altar. He saw Sheriff Brody near the stage, looking more like a stressed event planner than a lawman, his eyes scanning the crowd for troublemakers, never once suspecting the true nature of the trouble that was brewing. At precisely 7 p.m., the mayor, a portly man with a plastic smile, stepped onto the stage. "Welcome, citizens of Oakhaven, to the highlight of our Halloween festival," he boomed, his voice echoing unnaturally in the fog. "Tonight, we celebrate our town's rich history by unveiling a true masterpiece, a relic from our founding fathers, lost for generations and now returned to its rightful place." Two security guards wheeled out a tall, cloth-draped object. A hush fell over the crowd, a collective intake of breath. This was the moment. Noah's voice crackled over their cheap walkie-talkies. "It's happening. Get ready." The mayor grabbed the corner of the cloth. "Behold, the mask of Oakhaven." He pulled the cloth away. The mask sat on a pedestal inside a thick glass case. It was nothing like the simple, white mask Noah had seen in the cemetery. This was a work of art, horrifying and beautiful in equal measure. Carved from a dark, petrified wood, it was a distorted, elongated face, its features twisted in an expression of silent agony. Intricate spiral patterns, like the one from the artisan's grave, were carved into its cheeks and forehead. It seemed to absorb the stage lights, to drink in the energy of the crowd's awestruck silence. For a moment, nothing happened. A wave of anticlimactic relief washed over Liam. Had they been wrong? Was it all just a story? Then, as if on cue, Every light in the town square flickered and died. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a few nervous laughs. A power outage during a storm was a plausible explanation. But then, a low, resonant hum began to emanate from the stage, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their bones. The glass case housing the mask began to glow with a faint, sickly green light. "Now, Maya! Now!" Liam yelled into his walkie-talkie. Maya, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the air horn, squeezed the trigger. A deafening, discordant blast ripped through the square. It broke the spell for a moment, causing people to cry out in surprise and annoyance. But it was too late. The glass case on the stage exploded outward, showering the front rows with glittering shards. The mask floated in the air for a heart-stopping second, the green light pulsing violently, before it shot into the crowd like a guided missile. Panic erupted. People screamed, stumbling over each other in the darkness and the disorienting fog. The mask found its target. It attached itself to the face of a man in the middle of the crowd, a nondescript tourist who had been filming the unveiling on his phone. He screamed, a horrifying, gurgling sound, as his hands clawed at the mask that was now fused to his flesh. His body convulsed violently, his bones snapping and reforming. He grew taller, his limbs elongating, his clothes ripping as his frame expanded. When the transformation was complete, he stood a full head taller than anyone around him. The carver had been born. The figure stood still for a moment, its head cocked as if listening to a silent command. Then it moved. It wasn't a human movement. It was too fast, too fluid. It slid through the panicked crowd, a whisper of death in the fog. Carried no weapon, but it didn't need one. Its hands, now tipped with long, claw-like nails carved from the same dark wood as the mask, were its instruments. The slaughter began. It was not a chaotic, flailing attack. It was a precise, methodical, and horrifyingly silent butchery. The carver moved from one victim to the next with an unnatural grace. A swipe of its claws, a twist of a neck, all done with the chilling efficiency of a master craftsman at his work. The cheerful carnival music was replaced by a symphony of screams, a rising crescendo of terror and agony. From his vantage point, Noah watched in horror. It was exactly as the journal had described, as his nightmares had shown him. The carver was moving along the ritual path. Its first victim was near the fountain, the old well. It was now heading towards the giant oak tree. "It's going for the tree!" he yelled into the walkie-talkie, his voice strained with panic. "Chloe, get people away from there." Chloe, her face a mask of cold terror, began to scream at the top of her lungs. "Fire! There's a fire! Everybody run! This way!" She shoved and pushed people, herding them away from the oak tree and towards the alley she was supposed to be guarding. Some listened, their survival instincts kicking in, but others were frozen in fear, their eyes locked on the monstrous figure gliding through the fog. Liam did the same on his side of the square, his voice hoarse from shouting. He managed to push a small group, including a family with 2 young children, into the relative safety of a side street. But as he turned back, he saw the carver descend upon those who had been too slow, its movements a blur of deadly precision. The festive lanterns in the old oak tree now illuminated a scene of unimaginable carnage. The friends were separated in the chaos. Maya, after sounding the air horn, had been knocked to the ground in the initial stampede. She crawled under the stage, her body shaking uncontrollably, the screams of the dying echoing in the enclosed space. She covered her ears, tears streaming down her face, as the wet, tearing sounds of the slaughter continued unabated. Sheriff Brody and his 2 deputies were among the first to fall. They had drawn their weapons, their flashlights cutting uselessly through the fog, but they were no match for the carver's supernatural speed and strength. Their shots went wide, and the creature was upon them in an instant, their lives extinguished before they even had a chance to understand what they were fighting. Liam, seeing the official line of defense crumble, felt a wave of hopeless despair. But then he saw Chloe, still trying to direct people, her bravery a small, flickering light in the overwhelming darkness. He fought his way through the panicked mob towards her. "Chloe, we have to get out of here." Before she could answer, the carver appeared directly in their path, as if it had materialized from the fog itself. It stood over the fallen form of the mayor, its head tilted, the agonized face of the mask seeming to stare directly at them. Time seemed to slow down. Liam could see the intricate carvings on the mask, the way the fog swirled around its unnaturally tall frame. He could smell the scent of petrified wood and fresh blood. He grabbed Chloe's arm and pulled her into the nearest storefront, a Halloween novelty shop. They crashed through the door, sending a display of rubber masks and plastic skeletons tumbling to the floor. Liam slammed the door shut and fumbled with the lock. They could hear the carver's footsteps outside, a slow, deliberate crunch of boots on glass-strewn pavement. It was toying with them. From the clock tower, Noah had a clear view of the shop. He watched in helpless terror as the carver stood before the door, its head tilted. Then, instead of trying to break the door down, it simply raised its hand and pressed its palm against the glass window. The glass didn't shatter. It turned black and seemed to melt away, leaving a gaping hole. "Liam, Chloe, it's coming in. Get to the back." Noah's voice screamed over the walkie-talkie. They scrambled over the counter, their hearts pounding in their chests. The carver stepped through the melted window, its movements silent and deliberate. It paused, its masked face surveying the cluttered shop, a predator savoring the hunt. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the back of the shop as Liam kicked open the rear exit into a narrow, dark alley. "This way!" he yelled. They plunged into the alley, the cold rain a shocking slap to their faces. They didn't look back. They just ran, their footsteps echoing off the wet brick walls, the only sound in the world besides the pounding of their own blood in their ears. They didn't know if they were running towards safety or just a different, more secluded place to die. But they were running, and for now that was all that mattered. The symphony of slaughter in the town square was beginning to fade, replaced by a much more terrifying sound, the silence of the hunt. The hours between the slaughter and the sunrise were a blur of terror and adrenaline. Liam and Chloe ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, their frantic flight taking them through a labyrinth of Oakhaven's back alleys and deserted residential streets. The screams from the town square had long since faded, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. It was a dead silence, not the peaceful quiet of a small town at night, but a heavy, oppressive stillness that felt like a shroud. Every rustle of leaves, every distant dog's bark, sent a fresh jolt of fear through them. They eventually found refuge in the damp, musty crawl space beneath the public library, the place where their nightmare had begun. Huddled together in the darkness, covered in mud and grime, they could only wait, listening to the drip of water from a leaky pipe and praying that the carver would not find them. Maya remained hidden under the stage, her mind a fractured landscape of the horrors she had heard but not seen. She had curled into a tight ball, her hands clamped over her ears, but she couldn't block out the sounds that had been seared into her memory, the wet, tearing noises, the final, choked-off gurgles of the dying. At some point, exhaustion and terror had overwhelmed her, and she had passed out, her subconscious offering a small, temporary mercy. Noah was the only one who had witnessed the full extent of the carnage. From his perch in the clock tower, he had watched until he could watch no more. After seeing Liam and Chloe escape, he had watched the carver complete its ritualistic path, moving from the oak tree to the historical society, leaving a trail of death in its wake. It moved with a horrifying purpose, as if it were an artist completing a masterpiece. When it was done, it didn't flee. It simply walked to the center of the square, stood amidst the bodies of its victims for a long, silent moment, and then, as the fog began to thin with the approaching dawn, it crumbled. The unnaturally tall body collapsed into a pile of what looked like dust and dried leaves, leaving only the dark, wooden mask lying on the blood-soaked cobblestones. The tourist who had been its vessel was gone, consumed entirely. Noah had finally torn his eyes away, his stomach heaving, and had spent the rest of the night shaking in the belfry, the iron smell of blood rising up from the square below. The first rays of dawn crept over the valley, casting a cold, gray light on a scene from a slaughterhouse. The town square was a tableau of unimaginable horror. The festive decorations were now splattered with blood, the cheerful pumpkins looking like grotesque, leering witnesses. Bodies lay strewn across the cobblestones, frozen in the final moments of their terror. The fog had receded, revealing the full, brutal truth of the night. The first official responders on the scene were state troopers from a neighboring county, called in after the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department had gone silent. They walked through the square in stunned disbelief, their faces pale and set. This was beyond their comprehension. It wasn't a riot or a mass shooting. It was something else, something primal and savage. Liam and Chloe emerged from under the library as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. Every muscle ached, and a bone-deep chill had settled into them that had nothing to do with the cold. They found Maya being helped out from under the stage by a grim-faced paramedic. She was catatonic, her eyes wide and vacant, her body trembling uncontrollably. They rushed to her side, but she didn't seem to recognize them. Noah climbed down from the clock tower, his movements stiff and robotic. He met them near the fountain, his face an unreadable mask of exhaustion and shock. The four of them stood together, a small island of survivors in a sea of death, the terrible secret they had carried now on full, horrific display for the world to see. The investigation that followed was a chaotic mess. The FBI was called in, men and women in crisp, clean uniforms who looked utterly out of place in the blood-drenched, leaf-strewn square. They tried to impose order on the chaos, to find a logical explanation for an illogical event. How could one person have done all this? The sheer number of victims, the brutality of the killing sit defied all reason. The official story quickly became that a group of assailants, a cult perhaps, wearing identical masks, had attacked the festival. The carved mask, found lying in the center of the square, was bagged as evidence, its dark wood showing no traces of blood or fingerprints. It was just a piece of wood. The friends were questioned for hours. They told the truth, or at least a version of it they thought the authorities might believe. They spoke of a single attacker, a very large, very fast man in a terrifying wooden mask. They didn't mention the journal, the curse, or the supernatural transformation they had witnessed. They knew how it would sound. Sheriff Brody had already shown them that. Their testimony was taken, noted, and ultimately filed away as the traumatized ramblings of four teenagers in deep shock. In the days that followed, Oak Haven became a ghost town. A media circus descended, their satellite trucks lining the streets, their reporters giving breathless accounts of the Oak Haven Halloween massacre. But the residents, the ones who had survived, stayed locked in their homes, their doors and windows bolted. The remaining Halloween decorations were taken down, a silent, collective agreement that the holiday would never be celebrated in their town again. The vibrant colors of autumn now seemed mocking, a cruel reminder of the life that had been so violently extinguished. The bond between the four friends, forged in fear, began to show cracks under the strain of the aftermath. Maya was hospitalized, treated for severe post-traumatic stress. She barely spoke, and when she did, it was in hushed whispers about the shadows moving in the corners of her room. Liam was consumed by a quiet, burning rage. He felt an overwhelming guilt, a sense that they should have done more, that he should have been able to stop it. He spent his days aimlessly walking the deserted streets, his face a hard, angry knot. Chloe tried to retreat back into the comfortable world of logic and reason, but the world no longer made sense. She pored over news reports trying to find a rational thread, a clue that the investigators might have missed. But there was nothing. The horror of what she had seen, of what she had run from, played on a loop in her mind, shattering her pragmatic worldview. It was Noah who seemed to be coping the best, though in a deeply unsettling way. His fear had been replaced by a cold, clinical obsession. He had convinced a local reporter that he was a student journalist and had gained access to the crime scene photos. He spent hours studying the gruesome images, not with horror, but with an artist's detachment. He filled a new sketchbook, not with drawings of the carver, but with meticulous, detailed renderings of the victims, the bloodstains, the exact layout of the town square. He called Liam and Chloe to his house a week after the massacre. His room was dark, the windows covered, the walls plastered with his new, horrific drawings and maps of the square. "They don't see it," he said, his voice low and intense. He pointed to one of the crime scene photos, a wide shot of the square from above. "They think it's random, a chaotic attack. But it's not. It's a pattern." He took a red marker and began to draw on the photo, connecting the locations of the bodies. When he was done, the lines formed a familiar shape, the spiral with the 3 radiating lines. The artisan's symbol. "It wasn't just killing," Noah whispered, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "It was a ritual, a consecration. It was painting the town square with blood to complete a sigil." A cold dread washed over Liam and Chloe as they looked at the symbol scrawled over the image of the massacre. Alistair Blackwood's final words echoed in their minds. "The mask yearns for a face. The shadow craves the slaughter. Do not let the artisan find his masterpiece." "We thought the mask was the masterpiece," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "But it wasn't." "No," Noah said, his gaze fixed on the bloody symbol. "The mask was the brush. The slaughter was the masterpiece." Suddenly, a detail from the night of the attack clicked into place in Liam's mind. The artisan, the human accomplice. They had been so focused on the carver that they had forgotten about the one who prepared the way. Who was it? Who was the artisan? "Noah," Liam said slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at his friend. "That night, you were in the clock tower. You could see everything. Did you see anyone else? Anyone who seemed to be directing things? Or helping?" Noah looked away from the photo, his intense gaze meeting Liam's. He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Everyone was running, screaming. It was chaos. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a hesitation that made the hairs on Liam's arms stand up. The obsession, the detached study of the carnage. The way he seemed to understand the monster's motives, a horrible, unthinkable suspicion began to form in Liam's mind. He remembered the drawing Noah had shown them in the library, the shadowy figure in the town square. He remembered Noah's strange fascination with the town's dark history, his pilgrimages to the cemetery, his almost intimate knowledge of the carver's patterns. "Noah," Liam said, his voice dangerously quiet, "where were you right before you went up to the clock tower?" Noah's composure finally broke. A strange, twisted smile touched his lips. It was a smile of pride, of satisfaction. "An artist must always prepare his canvas," he said softly. The unmasking had come, but it was not the face of the carver that was revealed. It was the face of the artisan, the one who had walked among them, the one who had seen the approaching horror not as a curse, but as a beautiful, bloody work of art. The monster had an accomplice, and he had been their friend all along. The cold light of dawn had revealed the slaughter, but the shadows of the aftermath had revealed an even more intimate and terrifying truth. The revelation in Noah's dimly lit room hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Liam and Chloe. The boy they had known, their quiet, observant friend, was an accomplice to mass murder, a willing participant in the town's ancient curse. The trust they had shared was not just broken. It had been a lie from the very beginning. "You," Chloe whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and horror. "Noah, why?" Noah's smile faded, replaced by an expression of profound, almost religious, fervor. "Why does a painter pick up a brush? Why does a composer write a symphony? It's about creation, beauty. You see a massacre. I see a masterpiece, written in blood on the canvas of our town." He explained, his voice eerily calm, that his family were direct descendants of Ezekiel Thorne, the town's first artisan. The curse was not a curse to them, but a sacred duty, a tradition passed down through the generations. The role of the artisan was to watch, to wait, and to prepare the way for the carver. They were the keepers of the lore, the ones who ensured the ritual would be completed. It was his family that had discovered the lost mask and anonymously donated it to the Historical Society. It was Noah who had used his intimate knowledge of the town's electrical grid to cause the blackout at the precise moment the mask was unveiled. It was Noah who had painted the symbols, not just on the gravestone, but in subtle places all over town, consecrating the ground for the ritual. The carver is a force of nature, a pure, creative entity, Noah explained, his eyes alight. But it needs a guide, an artist to appreciate its work. That has always been the role of my family. Liam's shock curdled into a cold, hard fury. Appreciate it? Noah, it slaughtered dozens of people. Our neighbors, our friends. Did you appreciate that? Every great work of art requires sacrifice, Noah said, his voice devoid of remorse. They were the paint, the medium, the calm, rational part of Chloe's mind, the part that had been dormant since the attack, suddenly clicked back into place. She thought back to the journal. Alistair Blackwood tried to destroy the mask. He failed. He said it was too powerful. But he must have tried something. There has to be a way to stop this, to break the cycle. Noah let out a short, humorless laugh. You still don't get it. The cycle can't be broken. The mask is just a conduit, a key. You can destroy the key, but the lock is still there. The shadow, the entity that Blackwood wrote about, is tied to this town, to the land itself. There will always be a new key, a new mask. But the journal, Chloe insisted, grabbing Liam's arm as he took a menacing step towards Noah. What did it say? The last page was ripped out. What was on it? Noah's expression darkened. Blackwood was a fool. He thought he could cheat the pact. He wrote of a counter-ritual, a way to sever the connection, as he put it. It involved returning the mask to its source, to the heart of the petrified oak from which it was carved, and offering a different kind of sacrifice. A willing sacrifice. Someone who would give their life to close the door. A heavy silence filled the room. A willing sacrifice. The idea was as insane as everything else they had been through. Before they could process this, the sound of a key in the front door made them all freeze. Noah's parents were home. Panic seized them. They couldn't go to the police. Who would believe them? And they were now in a house with a family of cultists who had just orchestrated the town's demise. You have to go, Noah said, his tone suddenly urgent. It wasn't a threat, but a warning. My parents, they are far more devout than I am. They won't understand that I told you. They didn't need to be told twice. They slipped out the back door, their minds reeling, and ran, not stopping until they reached the familiar, now haunting grounds of the town square. The square was still a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape, but it was deserted in the late afternoon gloom. They stood there, looking at the place where so much life had been extinguished, the artisan's bloody sigil now nothing more than dark stains on the cobblestones. He's right, Liam said, his voice hollow. We can't stop it. Even if we destroy the mask, another will just take its place. No, Chloe said, her voice filled with a new, steely resolve. Noah said the mask is at the FBI lab in the next county. He also said the petrified oak is at the heart of the Blackwood Forest. And he told us about a counter-ritual. He may be a monster, but he gave us the pieces. Maybe, deep down, a part of him wants this to end. It was a desperate, insane plan, but it was the only one they had. Their first challenge was the mask. It was locked in an evidence room, miles away. But they had an advantage. In the chaos of the investigation, Chloe had seen the evidence manifest, had seen the number on the bag containing the mask. A few hours of frantic, legally dubious searching on the internet, and she had found the name of the junior evidence clerk on duty that night. A few more hours, and she had found his social media profiles, his complaints about his job, his love for a specific online game. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but Chloe crafted an official-looking email, spoofing it from a senior agent's address, requesting the evidence for further esoteric analysis, and citing a dozen obscure procedural codes. She included a detail about the clerk's gaming achievements, a personal touch to make it seem legitimate. They sent it and could only wait, their hopes pinned on a bureaucratic oversight and a young man's desire to impress his superiors. Miraculously, it worked. The next morning, A package arrived at a rented post office box. Inside, nestled in foam, was the mask of Oakhaven. It felt cold to the touch, and it seemed to thrum with a faint, malevolent energy. That night, under the light of a waning moon, they drove to the edge of the Blackwood Forest. The woods were darker, more menacing than ever before. With the mask wrapped in a thick blanket in Liam's backpack, they ventured in, following a barely-there trail from an old map Chloe had found in the library's digital archives, a map that marked the location of the Heartwood. The forest fought them every step of the way. Thorns tore at their clothes, and unseen roots seemed to grab at their ankles. The air grew colder, and the silence was absolute. After what felt like hours, they found it. In the center of the trunk was a hollow, a perfectly sized cavity from which the mask had clearly been carved centuries ago. This was the source. This was the place where the door could be closed. "Okay," Liam said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "The journal said we need to return the mask to its source. A willing sacrifice." He looked at Chloe, his eyes filled with a terrible understanding. There was no other way. This was the end of his road. He had been so consumed by guilt, so certain he had failed his town. This was his chance to make it right. "Liam, no," Chloe said, her voice cracking. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I have to do this, Chloe. For everyone who died. For us." Before she could argue, a figure stepped out of the trees. It was Noah. His face was bruised, and his arm was in a makeshift sling. "My parents were not pleased," he said, his voice raspy. "They believe the cycle is sacred. They believe you must be stopped." He looked at the mask, then at Liam. "I came to watch, to see the end of the art." Liam ignored him. He took the mask from his backpack. It felt heavier now, and he could hear faint whispers slithering from it, promises of power, of an end to his pain. He walked to the petrified tree and placed the mask back into the hollow. It fit perfectly, a key sliding into a lock. The moment it was in place, a wave of cold energy erupted from the tree, and the whispers grew into a roar in his head. He turned to Chloe, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "Go," he said. "Get out of here." He placed his hands on the tree, next to the mask. "I am willing," he said, his voice clear and strong, ringing out in the dead clearing. "I offer my life to sever the connection. I offer my blood to close the door." For a moment nothing happened. Then, the black petrified wood began to glow with the same sickly green light from the night of the festival. Veins of light spread from the mask, up Liam's arms, and over his entire body. He cried out, his body convulsing as the energy consumed him. Chloe screamed his name, but Noah held her back. "Watch," the artisan whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. "This is a new kind of beauty, the art of an ending." Liam's body dissolved, not into dust and leaves like the carver, but into pure, white light. The light surged into the tree, into the mask, and with a final, deafening crack, the petrified oak and the mask within it shattered into a million pieces, a shower of glittering, powerless dust that settled on the forest floor like snow. And then silence. The oppressive cold was gone. The malevolent presence that had haunted Oakhaven for centuries was severed, banished. The cycle was broken. Chloe stood there, weeping, in the now empty clearing. Noah looked at the dust, the last remnants of his family's terrible legacy, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. The door was closed, the art was finished. But the cost had been immeasurable. Oakhaven would never truly heal. It would forever be a town defined by a single horrific night. But the curse was gone. The shadows behind the mask had been vanquished, not by a hero with a sword, but by the quiet courage of a boy who had been willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. As Chloe and a strangely subdued Noah walked out of the forest and back towards the wounded town, the first true, clean dawn began to break over the valley, its light not a cold reminder of death, but a fragile, tentative promise of a new beginning.